war was young in 1942. D-Day was 2.5 years away. American factories were barely up to full production. But there was progress. Pearl Harbor was now one of 3 names in the Pacific, and the 4th, Guadalcanal, was eminently on the horizon. The Battle of Guadalcanal began on August 7, 1942. It was a grueling 6-month struggle on land, at sea, and in the air to oust the Japanese from the Solomons and stop their advance towards Australia. Strategically, it was a battle for an American footing in the Pacific. But more than that, it was a crucible of American and Japanese military traditions. It would pit withering machine gun fire against waves of soldiers brandishing bayonet and sword. It would test jungle camouflage and night fighting against defined lines and fixed positions. At the center of it all was Henderson Field, a vital airstrip occupied by the Marines on the 2nd day. Most of the ensuing land engagements would take place on its perimeter, fighting that would often end with American and Japanese soldiers locked in death grips of nighttime hand-to-hand combat. Guadalcanal was an air war too. Both land-based and carrier-based aircraft would engage the Japanese. B-17 Flying Fortresses, PBYs, Wildcats were but some of the airplanes used in the fight. Over 200 would be lost by both sides. Great sea battles would be waged around the island, almost all of them at night, as both sides fought fiercely to land reinforcements. 2 great fleet carriers would be sunk, the Wasp and the Hornet, and the mighty Enterprise would be crippled. In the end, the inexperienced American soldiers would win, but the battles were bloody indeed. 7,000 soldiers, sailors, and airmen would die on land and at sea against 25,000 Japanese. Disease and starvation would be as deadly as bullets, and both sides suffered terribly from jungle malaria. The Marines landed on Guadalcanal in August 1942 and fought until February 1943. Because it was the first land victory in the Pacific, the Marine Corps produced a documentary television program, one of the rare few produced during the war, for the benefit of the American factory workers.
The battle for Guadalcanal proved that even on that distant Pacific island, victory or defeat hung not only on the men on the firing lines, but on how well you folks back home carried out your share of the fight.
This long-lost but historically significant film is part 1 of our history of Guadalcanal. Interestingly, no other military documentary was ever produced on what was certainly the longest battle of the Pacific.
Destination unknown. When we shoved off that fine spring morning, only the staff members knew where we were headed, and they weren't telling. All the men wanted was action, and somehow they knew it was in the wind. The Marine can always smell a fight a long ways off. It wasn't until many days after we kissed the San Francisco shoreline goodbye and waved farewell to the Golden Gate that the news of our mission broke. Colonel Hunt's notice to the troops ended with these words: "Our country expects nothing but victory from us, and it shall have just that. We have worked hard and trained carefully for this action. Each of us has his assigned task. Let each vow to perform it to the utmost of his ability, with added effort for good measure. Good luck, God bless you, and to hell with the Japs." The Navy did a great job. As more and more ships joined us, it began to look like a really big show. The last day at sea was mighty rough. There wasn't much talking. Our radios were silent. This destroyer dashed back and forward delivering messages. We rendezvoused at night. Before dawn, we were in position and ready to go. Ships exchanged messages. Crews manned their battle station. This was the long-awaited moment. At 6:14, the big guns of a Navy cruiser opened fire on the shore. Ships all up and down the line joined in the barrage. The din was terrific. Our guns quickly found the range and plastered the entire shore. The Japs were caught completely by surprise, for there was no answering fire. Gunnery officers followed the accuracy of our shelling carefully. On shore, a supply depot burned fiercely. Our barrage had been effective. Now it was time to follow up. Men swung down over the side on cargo nets. They went calmly and in perfect order. But this morning it was the real thing, and somehow it seemed a long way down. Wave after wave of landing craft swept shoreward. Overhead, a screen of fighter planes formed a protective umbrella. The beach dead ahead, and still no sign of the enemy. First boats hit the shore without opposition. Not a man was lost in the landing operations on the island of Guadalcanal. But Guadalcanal was a battle of supplies as well as men. Over 5,000 miles of ocean lay between our island and San Francisco, and grocery deliveries couldn't be too regular. Even more important than food was the equipment we brought with us. Gasoline, for example, was worth its weight in gold. This barbed wire helped break up one of the Japs' most dangerous attacks. We could have used a lot more of it. Machine gun nests were dug and communication wires strung up immediately. If you've been wondering what a foxhole was really like, take a good look. These foxholes were home sweet home to many a Marine, often for as long as 10 days at a time. In deserted Jap camps, we found that our naval barrage had been mighty effective. They were in such a hurry to get away that they abandoned huge stocks of materiel. Sergeant Arndt, who later shot over a dozen Jap snipers, put on this captured uniform to show how they camouflaged themselves against the jungle background. Their rifles were longer than ours, but not nearly as accurate. Climbing spikes helped Jap snipers to mount trees easily. The Jap and the jungle were both enemies. Together, like this, they made a dangerous foe. This was a Japanese flamethrower. Our men tried out all captured weapons to get the hang of them. They got a big kick out of turning Jap guns around and shelling the enemy with them. But for dependability, American equipment was far superior. As one of the Marines told me, "Hell, Major, we're American troops and we just naturally want American weapons. In a tight spot, we want to know our guns and ammunition aren't going to let us down. That's why we look for that good old label, Made in the USA." On August 8th, the day after the landing, the Marines marched out and took Henderson Field. Except for some scattered sniping, the enemy put up no organized resistance. Henderson Field was really the key to our entire operation, for whoever would control the island of Guadalcanal must also control the air over it. One of the first moves was to run up the Stars and Stripes. There was a lot of work to be done before planes could use the field. It was chock full of shell craters. Most of them had to be filled in and rolled smooth. Some were used as observation posts and gun emplacements, and set up for business by their crews. The Marines and Seabees rushed the field through on the double. They used everything they could lay their hands on, including Jap steamrollers. But American machinery from back home did most of the heavy work. Some of the farm boys got kind of homesick running these tractors. Even before the runways were completed, our planes were taking off. Marine pilots and Army and Navy airmen worked tirelessly as one great team, flying SBDs, Air Cobras, and Grumman Wildcats. They were real heroes, those sky fighters, and no one thought more highly of them than our own troops, cheering them on from below. It took thousands of gallons of gasoline a week to keep our planes in the air, and we operated on a slim margin. Once we were down to a single day's supply when the Navy came to our rescue just in time. Those last planes are flying fortresses. The Marines used to call them those big, beautiful things. We planned our defense of the airfield carefully. Here at headquarters tent, Colonel Thomas presided over a group of officers and men mapping out an operational plan. Meanwhile, jeeps, command cars, and Marine working parties headed down the jungle road and marched over the engineers' bridge, built by our own men. Their mission was to strengthen the key strategic ridges around the airfield, immensely important defensive positions. This particular hilltop became known as Bloody Ridge. Looks harmless, doesn't it? Yet later, some of the fiercest fighting of the whole campaign took place here. First job was to clear away the underbrush. The Marines preferred fighting to this kind of work. Observation posts were hastily constructed. Frontline foxholes were dug, along with deeper and wider pits for machine guns. Favorite song of this Marine was, "You'll Be So Nice to Come Home To." Our own artillery continually pounded Jap positions to break up massing of enemy troops. These 105mm field guns did a lot of damage at long range. Frequently, our gun crews maintained this fire all day long when Jap concentrations became dangerous. American gun batteries proved far more accurate than the Japs. A plane spotter warns, "Here comes the Japs." To every man in Guadalcanal, this was an all too familiar sight. Jap bombers outlined in silver against the sky. Jap plane is hit. Watch it fall behind the trees. A machine gun crew cuts loose as the Japs go by. Another hit. Out of control, the Jap plane plunges toward the water. End of another Jap raider. But sometimes, by sheer weight of numbers, the Japs broke through. They took their toll of men and planes. They tore huge bomb craters in the runways. They wrecked buildings, and they set fire to oil stores. But no matter how often they came over, or how hard they tried, they never succeeded in putting Henderson Field out of commission. Even before the enemy attacks had ceased, American repair crews were on the job. Yes, these are our planes. But for every plane we lost, the Japs lost 5. For every pilot, the ratio was even higher. And even these planes weren't completely out of the fight, for our mechanics salvaged everything but the bullet holes in repairing damaged machines. Time meant everything down here. When new planes didn't arrive on schedule, our pilots flew the best they had. The badly wounded were rushed directly by hospital plane to nearby island bases out of reach of Jap bombers. Minor casualties and sick list patients recuperated in the local hospital stations. Guadalcanal's one and only refrigerator, operated by kerosene, saved plenty of lives. We bathed and did our laundry in the river whenever there was a lull in the fighting. But the dirt, like the Japs themselves, kept coming back. Today, an American supply ship came in, so tonight we ate like kings. Hot biscuits coming up. We cooked with a field stove and a Jap safe converted into a griddle. Imagine what a meal like this meant to the Marines after a stretch of emergency field rations and Jap rice. We watched the bulletin board like hawks. News from home, picked up at night by radio, was posted regularly. The big question, what's the #1 song this week? Most numerous among Jap prisoners were members of labor battalions called termites by the Marines. Most of them, when captured, didn't seem to take their fate too hard. Expecting to be tortured, Japs were amazed to be given humane first aid treatment. But compared to Jap dead, prisoners were few and far between. Thousands of Japs were killed in the savage fighting on Guadalcanal. As many as 800 died in a single night's engagement. Yet, as General Vandergrift wrote home, even though we lose only 1 man to the Japs' 10, that is still too high a ratio. They are such fine men, these boys of mine. They are doing their job in the best Marine tradition, and I could add nothing to it. From abandoned enemy equipment, many a Marine brought back his own personal souvenir. Corporal Barney Ross, later promoted to sergeant, received a captured Jap flag right on the field of battle. When he visited Guadalcanal, Admiral Nimitz, chief of the Pacific Fleet, decorated a few of the many heroes. This is Colonel Edson, who led a Marine Raider Battalion. In March, the entire 1st Marine Division was cited by President Roosevelt. Next, you will see 3 crack Marine pilots, Major Smith, Major Gaylor, and Captain Carl. Here's Major General Vandergrift, Marine leader, with Admiral Nimitz. Before we left the island, we saluted our dead, the Marines who will never come home. Our welcome relief arrived at last. The United States Army came in to take over. That first wave of doughboys sure looked good to us as they hit the beach. These troops were fresh, completely equipped, even to Rags, their mascot. We knew we were leaving Guadalcanal in good hands. Then down the roads we had trod so often, out of the foxholes and the jungle in which we had fought so long, came we Marines, heading for the ships that were to take us out of the battle zone. One last look. The American flag still flew over Guadalcanal. The taking and holding of Guadalcanal represents a victory of immense strategic importance. That the Japs knew this as well as we did is proven by the high price in warships and airplanes and men they were willing to pay in their futile attempts to recapture the island. In our hands, Guadalcanal represents an unsinkable aircraft carrier, stopping further Jap advances, and from which we, in turn, can strike again and again at other Japanese bases. When and where the Marines will attack next, I cannot tell. But attack they will, repeatedly and with determination. And this I can tell you. Whenever and wherever the Marines strike, they will want again the all-important backing of you folks on the production line at home. They will need it in the same full measure you supported them in those never-to-be-forgotten foxholes of Guadalcanal.
Follow the enemy. Navy pictures show the task force shooting down Jap planes. Plane skims the water far in the background and finally explodes. Watch this hit. One more Jap victim of our Navy's marksmanship.
The Battle of the Eastern Solomons was the second naval engagement of Guadalcanal, a battle fought to stop Japanese resupply. Unlike Savo Island, this was a carrier battle. Air wings from the USS Enterprise and the USS Saratoga were involved, both as attackers against the Japanese and as defenders of their own ships. The USS Enterprise would be badly damaged, but the victory went to the Americans. Japanese landings were repelled. The sea battle of Cape Esperance and the land battle of Henderson Field would both take place in October. The Navy needed to land the 164th Infantry Regiment of the U.S. Army's Americal Division. The Japanese had a reinforcement convoy of their own. In a flurry of fighting, 4 Japanese ships went to the bottom. The Americal got through, but so did many Japanese. And thus would begin the battle for Henderson Field. With fresh forces on both sides, Henderson Field would be the bloodiest engagement of them all. 3,000 Japanese would die during the 3 days of night fighting. America lost the carrier USS Wasp to a sneak attack by Japanese submarines back in September, then lost the USS Hornet in October during the naval battle of Santa Cruz. In this intense one-day carrier engagement, the U.S. fleet would lose 80 planes to 97 for the Japanese. Despite thick puffs of anti-aircraft fire dotting the skies, both sides scored major hits on each other's surface vessels. Even despite the strategic success of turning back the Japanese fleet, the biggest loss went to the Americans.
October 26, 1942, the day of the Battle of Santa Cruz. A sailor said,
"We were at battle stations in Condition 1 long before dawn. Our planes took off in the half-light, just at daybreak. About 0900, word came from our air group to expect a large number of Jap bombers. We stood by for the attack. The first of the Japs came into range about 0930, and our gunners opened fire. There were 2 different attacks during the day, and every Jap plane that got through our fighter screen was shot down by the Hornet's guns, 26 of them in 10 hours. First wave, a torpedo on the starboard side had smashed our engine room. And in the second attack, the Japs hit us with everything in the book, bombs and torpedoes at the same time. But our gunners continued to pump lead into the Japs, adding to our score, plane by plane. 3 Japs crashed aboard and started fires. With the engine room out, our power was gone. We lost steerage way and listed heavily to starboard. Later, during a lull in the battle, we organized bucket brigades. We flooded port compartments, but still listed to starboard 18 degrees. Knowing that we were in range of land-based Japanese bombers, and that it would no longer be possible to fight a ship that couldn't be righted, our skipper ordered us to abandon ship. We went over the side around 1700 and were taken aboard the rescue ship standing by. You could see our Hornet lying out there, deserted and sort of lonely. Somehow she seemed to struggle to stay alive. We hated to leave her, but the skipper knew best. And just as night came down to make her death quick and merciful,
Our captain ordered our own gunners to shell her and torpedo her. We knew how he must have felt giving orders to sink our ship when she had fought bravely in so many battles and had, in her career, shot down scores of Jap planes and damaged or sunk about 50,000 tons of enemy merchant shipping and over 200,000 tons of Jap warships. Next day, our wounded were transferred from the rescue ships to other ships that would take them home. Handling the stretchers was a good job of seamanship. And as each stretcher came aboard, some sailor would recognize a shipmate he'd been wondering about since we'd abandoned ship. The Hornet was gone. She'd been our home for over a year. In her, we'd lost something that had been part of us. She was a great fighting ship.
Kamikaze attacks, 5 bombs, and deadly accurate torpedoes cost the United States the carrier Hornet. The Hornet slipped beneath the seas on October 27th at 1 a.m. The naval battle of Guadalcanal and the Battle of Tassafaronga were the last engagements during the campaign. Both sides had landed major reinforcements on Guadalcanal in November, but the Americans had the advantage, not so much in strength, but in resupply. Japanese living in the damp jungle were suffering from disease and malnutrition. New stores were irregular and totally inadequate. The Battle of Guadalcanal was the last major Japanese effort to land food, medicine, and reinforcements. It failed miserably. An alert, aggressive U.S. Navy launched a blocking operation that sent 23 enemy ships to the bottom. Although the subsequent Battle of Tassafaronga would visit revenge on the American Navy, after the naval Battle of Guadalcanal, the Japanese High Command threw in the towel, and the island was evacuated.
At one time and another, it was my good fortune to have under my command on Guadalcanal men of all the armed services of the United States. If anyone ever held the idea that members of our different fighting units could not work together harmoniously and loyally to achieve a common purpose, one brief visit to that battle area would have quickly dispelled any such thought.
By January 1943, the battle for Guadalcanal was over. Major General Alexander Vandergrift was awarded the Medal of Honor for his command of the invasion forces. The 1st Marine Division, which spearheaded the campaign, received the prestigious Presidential Unit Citation. 60,000 troops were sent to the small Pacific Islands. Dozens of them would become heroes, and some of them, like Polar and Edson, the stuff of legend. The war was far from over in 1943. Guadalcanal, the unsinkable aircraft carrier, was the first stepping stone to victory in the Pacific.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Navy transports take the Marines for their attack on the Solomon Islands, and overcast skies shield them from Jap air observation. The sea is heavy. Watch that big boat pitch in the mighty swell. Off the hostile shore, American warships bombard the Japanese positions. Heavy damage done. Huge fires started. In the battle, an American plane is forced down at sea. There's prompt rescue, and the pilot is picked up. The landing of the Marines. The attack takes the Japs by surprise, and this wave of leathernecks encounters little resistance, swarming ashore. Official pictures made by the United States Marine Corps, and they show how an island sector was occupied. This contingent of Marines moves on to the burning airport on Guadalcanal Island. The flying field was constructed by the Japs, but now it burns, and the Americans have it and continue to hold it. This is the Guadalcanal Air Base, key point in the bitter struggle for the Solomon Islands. The Japs are attempting to recapture it. The Marines and regular Army troops defending steadily. Admiral McCain inspects the operation, and captured enemy armament in large quantities is tried out by the Marines. Jap flamethrowers as American fighting men test the kind of enemy weapons they encounter in battle.